armoured cruisers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries were generally seen as occupying one or more of four primary roles. For smaller navies, they might be part of the actual battle line. For larger navies, they could be part of fleet screens, undertake commerce protection, or be flagships on distant colonial stations. For the Germans, the relatively small number of armoured cruisers they'd built thus far were seen as primarily intended for the latter purpose, colonial stations, at least during peacetime, although as time went on and you approached the middle of the 1900s and more armoured cruisers were entering service, the role of fleet scout and fleet screen also began to creep into their mission statement. In line with this, the speed of German armoured cruisers was also gradually increased. And this actually provides a relatively easy way to distinguish the last two classes of German armoured cruisers from the previous ones, as they have 4 funnels to serve an increased number of boilers, instead of 2 in the first 2 armoured cruisers and 3 in the Prince Adalbert class. The successors to the Prince Adalbert class were laid down in 1902 and 1903 respectively, and each would launch about a year later. Although interestingly, the class lead ship would not commission until just over 4 months after her sister ship, even though her sister ship had been laid down somewhat later, largely due to the lead vessel being fitted out as a flagship, which meant that internal changes had to be made to the layout. 2 ships would therefore make up the class leader Roon and the York. Armament wasn't all that much changed from the preceding class, comprising 4 8.3-inch guns in a pair of twin turrets, one fore and one aft, a secondary battery of 10 single 150mm or 5.9-inch guns in a double-height battery either side amidships, with the 3 lower guns in casemates and the 2 upper guns mounted in single turrets. 14 single 88mm anti-torpedo boat guns, which was 2 more than the Prince Adalbert's, were scattered around the ship, with 4 single 450mm torpedo tubes present below the waterline, one pointing in each direction. Armour was a little on the thin side, with 3.9 inches maximum thickness on the belt, although at 2.4 inches the maximum deck thickness wasn't too bad for armoured cruisers of the time. Although speed was supposed to be 22 knots, thanks to 19,000 shaft horsepower from a trio of vertical triple expansion engines that were driving 3 screws, in practice the hull dimensions, which had been made to fit existing dry docks, meant they were only really capable of around 21 knots on a good day. Some of these issues were realised at the time of their construction and would be fed back into the design process for the next class of German armoured cruiser, the Scharnhorst class. With the Imperial German Navy becoming more belligerent and soon engaged in an arms race with the Royal Navy, the 2 ships never went to foreign stations as flagships. Instead, they initially became part of the first scouting group, but as newer ships, particularly the battle cruisers but also the Blücher, came into service, they were quickly relegated to foreign port visits and training cruises. In fact, their relatively poor survivability and low speed, combined with their high manpower requirements, would see both ships decommissioned well under a decade after they first entered service, with their crews then sent over to man the new battle cruisers. But with the outbreak of World War I, anything that floated was needed in service, and so the 2 were brought back into service and placed into the 3rd scouting group, which was just about fast enough to keep up with the high seas fleet, which allowed the much faster 1st scouting group to range on ahead. But in this role, York was lost within the first few months of the war, accidentally wandering into a friendly minefield outside Wilhelmshaven on the way back from operations surrounding the raid on Yarmouth, where she'd been escorting the high seas fleet in its support role. Roon, however, served on until her weak protection saw her sent over to the Baltic in 1915, as it was thought she wouldn't survive contact with her British opposite numbers, and that meant she spent the next year or so shooting at various Russian ships and shore positions. But continued losses in Germany's small armoured cruiser force added up. Blücher, both of the Scharnhorsts, both of the Prince Adalberts, and of course York had all been sunk, and that left only Roon and the two earliest armoured cruisers still afloat. And thus she was decommissioned again in 1916 and turned into an accommodation ship. Although some ideas were then floated to turn her into a seaplane carrier, the war ended before any work of this nature could be carried out, and so she was instead scrapped in 1920.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.